tell you about another project that we're exploring, and that is in the arena of expanded access. And when I say expanded access, I mean access to drugs and biologics and other medical products that are not yet FDA approved. And there are pathways for patients who have serious diseases or conditions who do not have comparable or satisfactory treatments and are not eligible or otherwise unable to participate in clinical trials to get access to drugs that are not yet approved. And there are three main types of expanded access defined by the population size. So an individual person who is seeking access to an investigational drug versus an intermediate sized population or a very large population that is granted access. And I just am bringing that up because today we're going to be focusing on the individual expanded access because there are different processes in place for the different types of expanded access. So there's been a lot of attention paid to this area in the last few years. It's obviously very important to patients who are struggling with serious and life-threatening diseases to have access to treatments that are not yet on the market that they believe may help them. There's been a lot of attention in the news, a lot of media coverage, TV coverage, social media. There's also, but this issue is fraught because there are plenty of reasons why people shouldn't necessarily have access to drugs before they're approved. And I'm not going to get into any of the ethics of that. What we're looking at is how you can improve the process, the expanded access request process for patients and physicians. And what that looks like is a patient who's in this situation would need to find a drug that they think, if it's in development, that they think might work for them. They have to request access to that drug from a company. If the company says yes, then they have to go to the FDA for sign off. And if FDA says yes, then they need to get permission from an IRB, and then they can obtain the drug. So there's a lot of confusion around this request process and the role of the various players involved. And no one seems to be happy with the system as it is. So FDA approached Reagan-Udall about scoping this issue and determining whether Reagan-Udall could serve as an honest broker here as well to convene all the stakeholders involved and address some of the challenges in this really complex landscape. And to give you a feel for the landscape, there are a lot of activities ongoing, as I mentioned, from social media campaigns that have led to actually death threats of CEOs of companies that are manufacturing a drug that a patient wants access to and has been denied. Press coverage, there's a lot of legislative activities. FDA is very busy on this with draft guidance and new forms to help expedite the request process from the FDA. On the FDA side, there's many industry activities as well as activities among nonprofits as well as for-profits in providing patient services to help them navigate this landscape and actually make expanded access requests. So the way we've approached this slide will probably look familiar from the food safety, is to do a lot of engagement and one-on-one consultations to try to get a feel for, get our arms around this issue and figure out where it is we could actually help. And so we convened a small stakeholder workshop in February and got feedback from a lot of patient advocates. We then developed a proposal, continued to do one-on-one stakeholder consultations. We put the draft proposal out there for a Navigator concept to help people navigate this request process. We held a public workshop for people to weigh in on that Navigator proposal last week and had a lot of interest, really great attendance, really great feedback, a little bit of coverage of that meeting. If anyone's interested, the webcast and slides are now available on the Reagan-Udall website. The comment period is open until mid-June. And I just wanted to thank those who helped support the meeting, which FDA co-sponsored it with us, and Bio and Pharma also helped support the meeting. And what came out of this initial consultation process in this public meeting for feedback is that access to information on the expanded access process really does seem to be a big barrier for many who are in this position and may want to request access, especially those outside of those who are not being treated in major academic medical centers. So right now, as I said, the comment period is open until mid-June. We're still gathering feedback, and what we're going to do is put all that feedback together and make a recommendation to the board as to how to move forward with this project, and as well as FDA on how we might move forward. So I laid out earlier what that process looks like. You have to figure out what drug might be out there for you that's not yet on the market. You have to make a request to a company, then you have to make an FDA request if the company says yes, and then there's this IRB step as well. And this can be very confusing for patients as well as healthcare providers to navigate. Where do you even look for this information? How do you identify points of contact? How do you evaluate the information that is available? So we took a look at what are some of the challenges in that process we can help smooth a little, and then what's off the table. And we definitely think we can help promote greater awareness and understanding of the process in general and provide some educational resources around what this process looks like and what the steps are. We can certainly provide, again, clear information on how and where to start this process. And FDA has some pretty good information up in terms of how to navigate their process, where one of the more troublesome areas seemed to be for a lot of people was on the company request. I don't know if I have a pointer here, but on the company request process. So that's what we've honed in on. How we can help make some of the information around making a request to companies clearer for people, and how we can provide assistance during the request process. What we can't act on is whether a company offers expanded access, who gets expanded access, FDA policies on expanded access in the request process, and how fast patients are hearing back from companies. FDA and IRBs on this issue. But in terms of providing more information and clarity around the process, we've developed a concept of an expanded access navigator, and we're proposing a call center and a website. So the website would have educational materials and a directory of company information on how to make the request process, who's the point of contact, and then we'd have a call center for live assistance. So some of the topics for the educational materials, and if you called needing assistance, are just better basic understanding of clinical trials, and that's really where you would want to start the process if you were looking for treatment. Maybe there's a clinical trial that's available to you. If not, maybe there is an expanded access program, which is a little different than the single patient expanded access. And then sort of the option of last resort is the single patient expanded access. But just understanding those options, and that there's not a lot known sometimes about the drugs that are in development, depending on where they're at in the development process, and that there are no guarantees that this might work for you. We could also provide information on the request process itself. What are the general criteria for expanded access eligibility, the principles of decision-making and risk-based decision-making in this area, the roles of all the players involved, how to approach companies in the FDA, how to prepare the request forms, and for healthcare providers, how to prepare the required safety and efficacy reports. So that's one piece in terms of the general educational materials and what a call center might be able to help you with. But then there's this idea of providing an expanded access directory. And this is what a lot of people seemed, particularly patients and advocacy groups, seemed most interested in. And this would be a directory to help you navigate companies. The directory would have the name of the investigational drug, the company name, what indication the drug is in clinical trials for, the clinical trial availability, because if there is a clinical trial available, you should go that route. Then what the company's access policies are, and then a point of contact at that company. And I don't want to make it seem like companies don't have any of this information up currently. They do, and pharma and bio actually have principles that ask their member companies, or I guess pharma actually requires their member companies establish points of contact and provide some basic information on expanded access. The issue is that some of this information can be hard to find. If you're a patient looking for this information, everybody's website looks differently. Sometimes the information is buried. So there's a lot of variation in the information from company to company. It can be hard to find. Not everyone provides a point of contact. Not everyone provides assistance throughout the process. And there's a big difference between what small companies are able to provide in terms of resources and larger companies, and then just variation in the request forms themselves. So that's why we think a directory might be useful to provide a more systematic way of looking at the information, a more standardized way, I guess. But even doing something as simple as that information is actually complex, and there's some logistics we would need to work through there. How do you keep all this information current? How do you track every drug that's in the development pipeline? Clinical trial info changes, points of contact may change, the availability of expanded access may change for companies where expanded access is even an option. This also depends a lot on the willingness of companies to provide this information. So we would definitely have to have companies on board and engaged in order to, and we have been talking with them about providing this information. And so there's been ongoing discussions about who's comfortable with providing what information. So the point here is that even this sort of directory is not simple, but it does seem that it would add value for patients. So the functions we've discussed are live assistance, providing some educational materials, providing a company directory. There have been some other functions proposed. There's sort of general agreement on those first three that they would be valuable. The other proposed functions require more discussion and even more resources, but that would be to track the number of expanded access requests, because right now that is not tracked and there's not good data on how many requests are actually made to companies. FDA knows how many requests they get, but that's only after a company has said yes, and you need to go on to that second step of getting FDA sign off. Nobody really tracks the outcomes, or at least not in a systematic way. Did the patient, was their request denied, or did they actually get access, and then what were their health outcomes as a result? Nobody really is tracking in a systematic way what the turnaround times are. How long does it take for companies or the FDA? FDA might track that, actually, but in terms of companies, how long is it taking for patients to get an answer from companies? And then another function that's been proposed, which is would be a tall order, is to set up a portal to apply for expanded access. So having one place where you would go to make a request for whatever drug it is that you wanted, and then the Navigator would route those requests. So like I said, these require a lot more investigation. I just wanted to put them out there as other things that have been proposed. So potential value of those functions we just described are having a central repository of expanded access information and assistance that currently does not exist, and standardizing the information that is available. I think there's also opportunity here for greater harmonization of that information, and we've heard that from some of the companies that we've talked to, that by bringing everyone together, maybe we can help bring companies together to get better harmonization on how they present their information, what their forms look like, what their policies look like, so that you're not dealing with a totally different scenario with every company. Generally improving transparency around the process by providing better information. We hope to increase especially around clinical trials and risk-based decision-making, increase health literacy in general, and hopefully by making the process a little bit easier to understand and navigate health equity, reduce the burden on patients and healthcare providers, because this can be a very time-consuming process to investigate drugs that are in development and make these requests. And also reduce demands on FDA and companies, hopefully by improving the clarity of the process so they're fielding less calls about basic information and can focus on the requests themselves. So the next step here is to continue to gather the feedback, assemble that into a report on what seems to be consensus from the needs assessment and recommendations on how to move forward, and then meet with the key stakeholders, including FDA, to discuss the report and make a go, no-go decision on moving forward, and if so, what that would look like. Okay, so that's where we stand with the expanded access work.
So I just have a few comments. First of all, thank you, Nancy. Great report. Also, I do want to say this was a huge amount of work and really good job pulling this together. Our task for Reagan-Udall was to really get stakeholder input and to bring disparate groups together to see what they thought about the Navigator. As Nancy said earlier, there were 2 meetings, as you can imagine, stakeholders are all over the place, and we will, in our later meeting, talk about that. But I agree that we have to write our report, we have to finalize our report, and FDA then has to decide. It is their decision on what this Navigator can look like, what are the key component parts of it, and specifically they're going to decide on where they want it, and then we will be back with them and make a decision. But it was very important to have a very good meeting, and we had over 120 people there. And again, thanks to Nancy and staff for doing this. It was very well done, very well attended. And I guess if there are any questions of any of our public members or anybody here, again, we will discuss this again in our sessions, but we're definitely willing to take questions.
Yeah, and on the Navigator or any general Q&A too, we have some time left over, so I'm gonna open the questions.
No questions? I guess there are no questions, so okay. I guess this concludes our public meeting, and we will